director's commentary is like. Alright. Let's see if it's a lot different. If he taught. Oh! I see. Hello.
Hello everyone, I'm Dan Pitchbeck, I'm the creative director of the Chinese Room, and this is the Dear Esther developers commentary.
Hi, I'm Rob Briscoe, I'm the artist on Dear Esther.
The most dangerous
And I'm
room,
Jessica
the
Curry,
house.
and I was the composer on the game.
So what you're looking at today is a remake of a mod. Dear Esther started off in 2007 as a Half-Life 2 mod that did really, really well in the modding community, which was fantastic, and as a result of that attracted the attention of Rob, who worked as the primary developer on a Source remake of the game that was released in 2012. And this year is another remake where it's been updated for a cross-platform release, and we wanted to add in this developers commentary just to give you a bit more of an insight into some of the ideas behind the game as it came together.
Oh wait. So, okay, so as we walk along, we'll find these little dots, I guess. Well, you know, because I want to go through and go to the places where we didn't go, because a lot of the time there was two paths that we could take, and we had to choose one. So, hello. There we go.
So you'll see around you in a lot of the environments, there's a lot of detail ingrained into everything. One of the things that I wanted to do with Dear Esther is bring the visuals up to the same kind of level of detail that Dan and Jess had put into the other areas of the game. So all of the history and the kind of hidden pieces of story that are intertwined with the VOs and the music and stuff, I kind of wanted to bring some of that into the environments. So if you look around you, you'll see that there's a lot of interesting bits and pieces, a piece of paper with someone's name on it, a photograph, an ultrasound, all of these little bits and pieces are kind of laid in to just kind of bring another aspect of the story into the game. And also, they're actually randomized, so every time you play, you'll see something different lying around.
No way.
And this is just to build on this idea that everybody has a unique experience and a unique interpretation of the story.
Ah, interesting. See, we didn't see an ultrasound. Is there... Oh, we didn't go into this cave the first time. See, it's worth looking. Too bad there's not a commentary in here. Can we jump? We can't jump. Oh, look! There's a, Okay, so something I did read, about this, that you see that blinking? Apparently that was Morse code, for something. I don't know Morse code, but it was Morse code. The blinking was something in Morse code. So that's kind of interesting that it randomly generates different things in different gameplays. And we didn't go through this side on. Can we go this way? Oh God, are we gonna fall? We're struggling. We're struggling. No. Wee. Oh, hi, kitty. Oh, Longy. Welcome, my special guest. Here, let's go over here and see what this commentary is. Oh, maybe we can also go to the lighthouse. That would be nice. Because we didn't get to go to the lighthouse last time. Hello. Oh, there we go.
Part of the point about the whole game, I think, was this idea that rather than having a linear, straight-through version of the story, that we could have multiple story units for each place you were, and I was really interested in this idea of how you can open up that space that people can interpret. So I loved the idea that you could have two people that had played this game and then would have a conversation about it, and one of them would say, oh, what did you think about when this happened? And the other person would be like, well, that didn't happen for me. I had a completely different event happen or a completely different story happen. And it kind of feels very gamey in that way, that actually one of the things I love about writing for games is that you hand over so much control to the player that it becomes their story, and that's really, really important rather than trying to force them. So using randomised blocks of voiceover in the game and the kind of randomised prop details that Rob was talking about means that it gives it a really different feeling every time you go through. And that's kind of interesting for me, because I like the idea of going, well, not everyone has to have the same experience, and because it's interactive, you have the capacity to have very different experiences occupying the same space. So yeah, but balancing all that then becomes an absolute nightmare.
I think it's nice though, because everybody gets a personal experience. Like, I love reading the forums and seeing how people come and they sort of tell their story and what they interpreted of it, and then you see other people discussing what they thought of it. And to me, it's kind of nice because everybody takes something unique away from it.
That's cool that it's not just like one story, huh? I was thinking that it would be one guy just telling us what the story is. But it's cool that it's a couple of different people and they're having a dialogue about it.
When I wrote the music for the mod of Dear Esther, there was absolutely no budget whatsoever for live players, so all the music was sampled. But one of the good things about that is it actually forced me to be quite creative about how I wrote the music. So with my background in sound art, I wanted to use samples in a different way that wasn't just using it to sound like a violin. I wanted to time stretch and manipulate samples to make something different and strange and quite unique. But then when we got the Indie Fund money, I had the amazing opportunity to re-record the music with live players. And that was so exciting for me, actually, because that's where it comes to life. And I thought long and hard about whether to write new music, going from the mod to the commercial version, but actually I decided that my initial and original emotional response to the game was probably going to be the strongest response and reaction that I had. So I just literally, the music that I'd written for samples, I then wrote out for live instruments. But what they bring to it is transformative, actually. And I think The Beach is a really good example of this, where you have these awful samples soaring away, and then you have the string quartet playing this very bleak, very sparse music, and they bring the presence of the island immediately to it, and it comes to life. And that's the exciting thing about it. It wasn't a huge budget, but just having that experience of working with the players was just magical.
The only thing is, it's I wish that it was more like, because we have to wait if we want to keep hearing what they're saying. Let's see.
Everything about Esther for me is a dream. The landscape is not an island, it's the dream of an island. The music is like music that you wake up because you've heard in your sleep, but you're not conscious of hearing it. And the language in the story was supposed to be like that as well. It didn't matter the sense it made, it was more about the kind of the shapes it created, if that makes sense. So that the words were like being in water, like listening to something underwater. It'd be this very dreamlike, symbolic, poetic thing. And it always had frustrated me in games with game writing. This has really changed quite a lot. There was never any space for poetic language. It was very exposition-y, very descriptive, very direct. And you'd have like art and audio would have these amazing creative spaces they could explore. But when it came down to actually writing, you just had to basically go into the room, describe the character, tell the player what to do. And it just seemed like the most boring thing you could do with words in a game. And why couldn't a writer have the same artistic freedom as a visual artist or an audio designer or a musician, in terms of being able to say, isn't this just about creating this kind of emotional tone, this emotional space? And it's really, I still love that about the game. And it's one of the things I love so much about Nigel's voiceover, is it has this really odd, disconnected, kind of dreamlike quality to it, where you might finish the game and not actually understand anything that happened. You'd be carried along in the flow of it. And without any kind of sarcasm at all, I get into trouble saying things like this. The same design principle applies as this to Halo. It's 30 seconds of fun, or 30 seconds of depressing engagement, I guess, in our case. But it is about that loop of being in the moment in the game constantly, and that's actually the critical thing that matters.
That's interesting. The narrator did have a very haunting voice, didn't he? Maybe they'll describe these symbols a little bit.
This symbol on the beach, which is
good.
the golden ratio, is
Golden ratio, that's what it
one
was.
of the only things that's really left explicitly from the mod. In the original mod, there was an awful lot of more kind of symbols and
It is a golden ratio.
much
Oh,
more
I
kind
knew
of
that.
mystical, sort of magical
I
element
didn't-
to the island. There was
I
a
didn't
lot of
say
very
it, but
weird stuff in there.
I thought.
And a lot of them came out of the commercial version because they felt like they were a little bit explicit. And instead, there's a lot more hidden kind of codes and symbols in there. There's still some stuff which you can only actually see or experience if you are not playing the game, if you're looking at it from editor. We had in the original mods things like trees planted to mirror the shape of the M5, or there's a whole bunch of
Interesting.
things that are there to represent star clusters and all kinds of things like that. And we'll probably talk a bit more about kind of like hidden details and the secrets in the game as we go through. But that was really interesting for us in terms of the design of it, of going, you've got your kind of your conscious, explicit play experience, but games are always constantly manipulating your mood and your feelings and the decisions you're making. And so really trying to create a space that had all of these kind of subliminals in it was a really interesting thing that we wanted to do, both with the original, and then I think it got lifted up into a much more sophisticated version when we went to the commercial, because Rob's able to bring that sort of level of artistry to the visuals that really got that kind of sense of hidden meaning in there. And that was really important, given how kind of complex and symbol heavy and poetic the story is, where a lot of it doesn't actually make any sense, but it's about kind of leaving you with these, I guess, like the half-life of ideas and thoughts that you can't quite shake, that stay with you. So we really were trying to get that blend of how music, story and visuals could all create that really sort of uncanny structure that you wouldn't necessarily be able to define properly, but you knew it kind of had a meaning that was staying with you.
See, this is a good game to play when you're sick, because you're in like a fever dream.
So something I wanted to do as an artist was create some kind of reward for the player when they explore the island. There are some areas of the game where it's a little bit more quieter, there's no music or there's no voiceovers. So I kind of wanted to create a bit of an incentive for people to explore. And you'll find around the island that these kind of like random scattered items that are usually slightly out of place from the environment themselves, but in another aspect they actually bring a little bit of story to the island itself, usually to the island or to the actual protagonists or you know, the characters that surround it. So you'll find around the island these little props and stuff. Just keep your eye out for it if you're exploring.
Alright, the one time that we needed the commentary to be a little bit longer, it was a very short little commentary, because now we have to make it all the way up to the beach. Because I feel like the commentary is either like really long and you're like waiting to get to the next little commentary, or it's too short, like that snippet, because now we had to make it all the way back up to the beach, all the way up to here. But I like the way that this is kind of organized, like you pass through and it just gives you commentary. It's a little bit interactive. You know what, it is 5,000 degrees in here, and I'm gonna have to turn on my fan, because I'm not feeling well. I'm like feverish, so I'm gonna turn on my fan a little bit so that I cool down a tiny bit. So I'm sorry about the noise of the fan.
So people have asked why the Dear Esther's set on a Hebridean island. What's really interesting about this is it's one of those times when your kind of aspirations as an artist and the practical realities kind of dovetail. We knew that we had to have some way of limiting the player from disappearing off the play space, and when we made the original, it was a mod, and because it was a Half-Life 2 mod, you kind of had Eastern European city, spaceship, or blasted, desolate landscape. You had three options if you didn't want to start making any other assets. So it started off with these practical constraints. We don't want to set it on a spaceship, we don't want to set it in an Eastern European city, so it's got to be on this kind of like this desolate landscape. And we want to limit the player, so an island seems like a natural choice. And it's really interesting how you start from that, and we had this big lump of clay on a table that we were carving out paths and things to annoying the cleaners and things like that. And Jess and I were talking, and Jess started making sort of snippets of music to kind of go in there. And then all of a sudden we just went, oh, that's the story. Oh, that's what happened here. But it really started, I think, from the place. And when we started looking at photographs of Bore, we started going and reading some of the history behind it. Suddenly that was it. And it just was really, really naturally became, this is the place, this is what happened here, this is how it feels. And then everything else kind of coalesced around that.
Yeah, I think as an artist it made my job a lot easier, because those islands are so kind of like, the environment is kind of hostile. You're out there in the Hebrides, you've got this kind of like inclement weather, you've got cold, rain, snow. It's a very kind of, it can be a very depressing place to be at times, but it's also at the same time very beautiful, and it's this kind of like stark, bare landscape, but that has this beautiful surroundings. So it's, in terms of art, I think it really helped me to portray a lot of the themes in Dear Esther.
And there was a natural fit with the music as well.
Yeah.
It suggested a musical style, which was really key, I think.
One of the things you're always trying to do as a composer is create memorable themes. And a slight confession is that probably the most memorable theme, which is Remember in Dear Esther, wasn't actually created for the game. Rob's looking shocked. So it was actually from a piece of choral music that I'd written years before, based on a Christina Rossetti poem called Remember. And one of the things I was talking about earlier was how I didn't have any budget. So I had this piece of choral music, and I thought, hang on, this is absolutely perfect for Esther, but I don't want to use all of it. So the only bit that you actually get in the game is the first line of the choral piece of music. But that actually went on to form the main theme of the music that I wrote. And I think for me it's really interesting about how things that you've written earlier, years before, sometimes come in really, really useful and fit. So I always tell people and students not to despair if something doesn't get used or doesn't work at the time, because actually there'll come a place or in a time where you think, hang on a minute, I've got something that fits. So in terms of that memorable theme,
That's a good lesson.
the Remember theme gets used in multitude of different ways during the game. And one of the things it does is helps you to identify the kind of psychic place that you're in the game. So the theme is played in lots of different ways, and actually you'll notice that as you go through the game, it becomes more and more broken and more manipulated and broken down as the player goes through the journey and as you're psychologically struggling to get to the end point in the game. So music's really, really useful for highlighting the psychological mood. And we talk a lot about psychogeography, which always sounds a bit pretentious, but actually I think it's really important to what the three of us did in the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dan, maybe you want to
Sort
talk
of like the
about
core
that.
kind of idea about psychogeography. If you're not in the place you're in, is not the place you're in, or you create the place you're in. It's not just as you're here and then the landscape's out there, but you don't navigate like a city by street signs and by those kind of formal things. You navigate it by the things which are significant to you in the way that you've lived in that space. And I think that was really kind of key to, I think it's really central to how the fusion of art and story and music come together in Dear Esther, because it's not a place where we're going, right, we have to lead the player up here because it's a natural formation, and then you would naturally have a piece of music here because you come around the corner. But the story, music and art all work around the idea of what's going on in the narrator's head at this point. How do we represent his emotional state relative to this landscape? And again, it's that idea of the game is, it's a dream of a place. It's like the idea of it being a fever dream or a coma dream, which obviously ties in a lot with the kind of story, and we'll come back to it in a lot more detail when we get to the caves a bit later on.
It was made for me in this moment. Yeah, and some of the comments I read was that the game is pretentious, but it's pretentious in the correct way, I feel like.
White Lines. They actually did this.
Describe that.
It was really cool. I found this historical document. They used to do
Interesting.
this on Bora and the Hebrides. If the disease broke out, they'd actually chip out and expose the chalk. So if you're on a boat and you were coming to the island, you know not to land because it was infectious.
Wow.
Which is the coolest, most amazing. It's one of those things where you go, it's almost impossible as a writer to come up with something as cool as that. It just has to be something that was
It
actually
had
done.
to
And
be,
it's
yeah.
so sad as well. And I love this bit and the fact that we can do it because it feels really real because it references a real thing. And like, I know there's something really special about that, but it was always one of those bits in the game that I thought, we've got to be able to represent this somehow. We have to be able to get these things in here.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I actually didn't know that was actually based historically in real life, but that's really cool. Because I mean, my thing about the White Lines is that it was this completely surreal thing, but also it was kind of it just added to the landscape. It's like, whoa, what the hell is that? And putting that into the game was kind of challenging because to me it just seemed like, oh, it's going to be really hard to pull off in a way that's kind of realistic. But then when you look at the kind of art style of the game, it's not really a realistic thing. Like everything is half imagined. So in that way it kind of really fit into the landscape, and it kind of creates this amazing sort of landmark that you see in the environment. And I just found it really interesting to hear about that.
I think it's one of those things where it's not a realistic place. And I mean, no game is a realistic place anyway, but one of those things where understanding that you're making something which isn't real and you have that kind of capacity to be sort of, to explore it artistically. And we'll come back and talk about sort of like it not being realistic, I think, in a little while. But that's really, really important because then you can say it's about what these things kind of represent or how they make you feel as a player, not about going, is this accurate? And I get really inspired by sort of doing a lot of research into kind of history and things like that with all of our games, because you can just find those things that just kind of like speak to you. But it's amazing you can find that in like an 18th century book and go, that really speaks to me now, that has meaning now, and that's fascinating, I think.
It's interesting that I feel like they're some of the things that they're talking about for the first time. Like they'd never talked about the White Lines before.
Something that I wanted to bring through in the art of the game was the same kind of fidelity that you find in both Jessica's music and Dan's writing. In the same kind of way that you have all of these little details, these very close attentions to detail that kind of really bring richness to the story. And something that was missing in the original mod version was just this lack of a visual layer of story. And something that I did throughout the art of the game is to add in all these little details here and there, little bits of story, little links to certain things that you may or may not hear or see, just a layer of richness in the world and give you some kind of reward for exploring. So keep your eye out as you look around.
Yeah, like we see these things. We can't really read them though. It's like old scraps of newspaper or something.
There's a scene in Donnie Darko where Drew Barrymore's playing his English teacher, and she talks about Celador as being the most beautiful word in the English language, and about it's the sound of the words together. And Dear Esther actually comes from the introduction from the Faith No More song, the Crab song on the first album, Introduce Yourself. And there's a point where I think it's Chuck at that point as the vocalist before Mike Patton just says Dear Esther, and it really lodged with me because the sound Dear Esther just has a really amazing sound to it. And I think when we started making it, and the idea of it being this series of letters to someone came through, it just came straight back out of going, that's just a really beautiful sounding combination of words. And I think that really sums up the whole approach to the writing in Dear Esther of what's the most beautiful combination of words and images we can put together, and to do it that way rather than writing a traditional plot as such. So yeah, Dear Esther, Faith No More and Doom, that's where it comes from.
Faith no more and doom.
think the central question to the entire experience, for most people that have played it or are talking about it, is this idea of, is the island real? Is what's going on a literal event of a man walking across a Scottish island, or is it a dream that he's had? Does the island even exist? And one of the things that we try to do with the writing is to constantly lull the player into a position where they got an understanding, they made a decision about what they thought was going on, and then to undercut it. So you never actually were able to settle on any one interpretation. And that was the challenge I set myself when I wrote the original mod, was can we put a story in a game that not only lends itself to multiple interpretations, but there is no stable interpretation. Every single interpretation you have will always have questions, and you'll never be able to fully trust what you think you understand about the game. So it's challenging, I think, for that result. It becomes quite a challenging kind of game story because of that, because you don't ever get that situation to go, I understand it now, I can walk away from this thing and it's all closed off and it's tidy. It was a very deliberate attempt to say, no matter where you think you are with this story, you're always questioning whether or not that's right.
It's a very gaslighty game. It questions your own mind. Perfect game for fever dream sickness.
One of the things that's been most commented on with the audio and the music in Dear Esther is how sparse it is. And that was a really deliberate tactic. I wanted to leave room for the player to think and to dream and to wonder and to put their own interpretation into what was happening. And I think the problem with so much modern media is how bombarded we are constantly as the kind of MTV flash in your face, constant music. And Dan and I watch a lot of drama together, and that really is constant music.
Endless, which is constantly telling you what you should feel, like really clearly, and it's like being kind of beaten up by the music sometimes.
And when you read a lot of reviews of Dear Esther, a lot of people say they had this time to think and to interpret, and that was one of their favourite things, that they placed themselves so directly into the game, and it's their experience. And I think that's actually the greatest success of the game on all points, from the story to Rob's art to the music, is we all left space for the player to dream.
Mm-hmm. It's quite a nice sentiment. Yeah. I wonder if they'll talk about these rocks, the Stonehenge-looking thing.
So there's a lot of places in the game where you see a lot of strange things, and this is very deliberate. One of the things we wanted to do is just kind of like not spoon feed the player every little piece of story. We kind of just, some things are literally just in there to just kind of let you think and let you decide on whatever you want to bring to the story yourself. So it's kind of like I approached it like an impressionist painting, where you've got like this kind of very vague outline of things, but if you stare at it enough, you can kind of like fill in the spaces, and kind of the image comes together on its own. So a lot of these kind of strange pieces of geography and stuff, that's really kind of deliberate in some ways, just to kind of keep the player's mind open and kind of bring their own interpretations of the story through that.
So they're like, you're on your own for the Stonehenge thing. because the narrator didn't say anything about Stonehenge, and neither did the director. I was like, you're on your own. Think of what it might mean yourself. I think that around here is the end of the chapter, actually, because we fall down right here. And, yeah, right here we fall. Whee! I know it's really slow paced, but I'm digging the commentary. I want to continue.
When I was originally thinking about how to write the music for the game, I suddenly realised that you don't see anybody in the game, and the most important character as such is the island itself. So one of the things that I did with the music was to write the island as if she or he were a character in its own right. And that's really important, I think, that you're going through this space and actually it's completely devoid of people, but the music in a way populates the island, and that the voice of the island speaks to you through the music.
Which is interesting, because I think that's really come on in terms of later games we've done, that sowed the seeds for the way in which we approach music in Rapture, where it was very specifically the voice of characters. And Machine for Pigs as well, where the music was about being Lily's voice in the game, Lily's representation of the game. So it's interesting how, looking back on Esther, a lot of those kind of ideas were tried out here that then came on to take other forms in stuff we've done since.
Oh yeah, Rapture. I think I saw a commercial, like a trailer for that. It's like where everybody disappears and you're walking around like an abandoned town.
Alright, let's talk about walking. Let's do it. We're gonna address the elephant
Granddaddy
in the room, the very,
walking
very slow
game.
moving elephant in the room. So this might be a longer conversation because it kind of fits with that. So Esther was the first of the what are now called walking simulators, and it was really interesting that for us it didn't feel that weird to have a game that was slower than normal, where actually there was lots of time to just walk around and think and look at things. And it was amazing at the time how this was seen as completely revolutionary. And it's really interesting. It's amazing to see how many other games have kind of like taken it on board. For me, it came from, I didn't see it as being odd to have a game where very little happened, where you thought about what you were doing. For me, it was kind of interesting that you could play some of the best moments in Doom are the bits when nothing's happening and you're just doing it, or System Shock, or those games that I absolutely love. Those quiet moments were the really powerful ones. But Esther is definitely slower than a lot of games, and I think that's actually why it's lasted. I think if we did have moments where we went, should it be faster, should we put a sprint button in, but I'm so pleased that we kind of held on there and
Interesting,
went,
yeah.
no, just as like in real life, I don't run everywhere because that would be weird. It's okay to have a game where you don't run everywhere.
I said,
Actually, it is a
I'm
bit
a
weird to
walking
run
game.
everywhere. But if you're going to do that, then you've got to support it in other ways, and I think the music was a really powerful way of supporting
am
that
what I
change of
am.
pace.
What's really funny for me though, Dan, is that shamefully I'd never played a game before I worked on Dear Esther, so I didn't realise that all games weren't like this, which is now looking back really naive. But I didn't realise that games didn't have, always have, this slow pace, and I thought there were lots of meditative games out there, and that actually wasn't really the case at the time, and that's exploded since. But in terms of the music, supporting that pace that you'd set emotionally felt really important. So if you listen to the music, actually the BPM is a very slow walking speed, and it just almost, there's a lot of things now that say it's called entrainment, that it slows your heartbeat, or it can speed up your heartbeat when you listen to music. And actually I think what the Esther music does really successfully is it makes you almost accept, and more than accept, that speed. You actually start to feel that's the pace of your journey, and that I really like that about the music actually.
It just, it makes you just comfortable with that pace too. I think it just eases you into it. You feel relaxed.
Oh, I'm glad they addressed the walking. That is fairly funny. I wonder, because we didn't get to go this way the first time we played. I just went down to the ship to see it, so we'll see what's over around the corner. I wonder if that blinking light is also Morse code. It doesn't. I don't know that much about Morse code, to be honest.
The radio mast in Dear Esther is obviously there is a really important kind of design feature, as well as its place within the story. And that, I think, came from, it was really interesting, it being a Half-Life mod to begin with, and the Citadel in Half-Life 2. That it tells you how far you are through the game. You're always looking up to the skyline. Am I closer to the Citadel? Can I see it? and it lets you know how near you are to the end of the game. And it was really important because Esther's so open in a way, and because there isn't this, you're not using kind of shootouts or kind of gating it with combat encounters to kind of constantly keep you moving. That it was really, really important that you always had that focal point of going, I know exactly from the beginning of the game, virtually right from the start, you know where you're going, you know where the game's going to end up, and you know that sooner or later you're going to be either at the base of that thing or climbing that thing, and it's always there, that red light. And I think particularly with the colour palette of the game, the fact that you've got this very, very, very clear red light that's unlike any of the other colours in the game immediately tells you as a player, this is what the shape of this thing is going to be, this is where I'm going, this gives me a purpose, even if the sort of moment by moment is a bit more abstract.
Yeah, and navigationally as well, it helps you, it draws you in the right direction as you play the game. You can never get lost if you just follow that one landmark.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting place of where that sort of traditional game design is still, there's loads of it in Esther, it's just not necessarily done in quite the same way.
I wonder if they'll talk more about the ship.
So something you'll notice as you look around the environment is, you know, from a distance you see the landscape. It's kind of a beautiful place in some ways, but something I wanted to bring to the game is that there's this second layer beneath the surface, whereas if you look at things closely, you see that the actual island itself is very polluted. It's kind of very rotten. You know, everywhere you look, every rock, every grass surface, it has this layer of filth on it, and it's kind of been put in there just to kind of emphasize further that this island's a really unpleasant place to live. It's like if you scratch the surface, you see like just how corrupt this island is.
I like that it gets quieter in here. The sound design is so good.
We cast and did all the voice direction for Esther ourselves for the mod, and it was basically Jess and I on a casting website just listening to people's show reels and finding what's the voice of this thing. There was never any question about Nigel. I think we heard his show reel for the first time round. It's probably been listened to sort of 30 or 40 actors, and we started listening to his show reel and just both looked at each other and went, that's it, that's him. And it was amazing when Nigel came in. We had, I think, a day and a half to do the whole thing.
Wow.
And he just did that amazing thing that really, really great actors did. If he just walked in, got in front of the microphone, and more or less did the entire thing in one take. And we did hardly any retakes on anything. It just felt like his instinct for the character in the game was so strong. But he just,
I didn't
without
see this first
virtually any direction,
I wonder if that's
just came in and just got it. And one of the hardest things with the voiceover that we did was when we went from the mod, which had 3 potential narrative units per queue, to 4 potential narrative units per queue, was not only finding new bits of writing that kind of complemented and played off what was there in the original mod, but for Nigel to come back in, nearly 5 years later, and to just re-find that voice in exactly the same way and deliver it in a way that fitted in and complemented it was a real testament to his ability as an actor, I think. That apart from we had spent quite a lot of time trying to make the sound actually sound the same in terms of mic placement and things like that, but in terms of the actual delivery of those new monologues, you wouldn't know that that was both written and acted sort of 4.5 years after the original thing was done. So the one person who's not in the room sort of today but deserves a huge amount of credit for how the game kind of eventually was delivered, but also I think in terms of how the game has lasted, a huge amount of respect needs to go to Nigel Carrington for his work on it.
Yeah, the voice acting was very good. Of course, his name would be Nigel. I don't remember, did we go up or down? I think we went up, so this time we're gonna go down. Because I wanted to go the opposite way of where we went the first time. Yeah, we definitely didn't go this way.
So this hole
Oh,
in
God.
the ground was kind
We
of
didn't see this the first time.
a difficult thing in some ways. It's a bit of a challenging aspect of the game.
Yeah.
In some ways, it kind of like, I think for me, we wanted to have this kind of this pit here, and I wanted the player to be able to actually go as close as possible and like look over the edge and you know kind of have this feeling of dread and stuff. But the other issue that we faced was like, what happens if the player just jumps into the hole? Like
Yeah.
we have no real death in the game, and from a design point of view, Dan, I mean, I don't know what you.
It was really hard because
Yeah.
you know it was a game where we
What
couldn't
does
let the
happen?
player die. We didn't want to have respawns, but we had to handle the fact that there
Players are
would be
gonna
those
jumping in.
accidents where the player would fall off a cliff or something, but also the deliberate urge as a player. You know, the first thing you're going to do is
Intrusive
go, great, there's an
thoughts.
ocean, how far out can I go?
Yes.
Or there's a cliff that's really high, can I jump off it?
That's the first
And how
thing
do you
I
have death in a game where you can't have the player die? Because if the player starts breaking up the experience by dying and reloading, then you're in a really, you start breaking the experience a lot. So
We'll jump in and see.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't want to also have like artificial boundaries, you know, where it's
Yeah.
like an invisible wall. If you take a look through the game, you'll never see a place where you think you can get to, but you can't. There's always some kind of actual natural boundary or man-made
I
boundary.
guess that's true.
So,
you can't
yeah,
go
that
across
was
the
that
rocks.
was the other
and
thing. We
stuff.
didn't really want to create this invisible wall around this thing.
I did
so,
appreciate that.
it kind of, the whole drove the way in which that sort of the very weird audio visual, probably one of the most dreamlike bits in the game, where if you do die and you get the kind of the heartbeat and the strange flashes of visuals, and I think in a lot of ways,
We'll
if
jump
we
in.
hadn't had the
We'll
hole
see
there,
what happens.
we hadn't had a place where we go, right, players will jump in this hole, we have to start from that basis, they will throw themselves down this hole. It kind of gave us
We're jumping
the
in a
impetus to
minute.
really, really focus on it, and I think the stuff like the drowning deaths and the cliff deaths are strong because the hole was there, and I'm not sure if the hole hadn't been there,
Yeah.
whether or not we'd have arrived at that way of handling it, which I'm really proud of. I think it's a really incredibly creative, interesting way of handling a player going out of bounds and of actually being able to reset the game when the player's basically done something you ideally wouldn't want them to do.
Yeah, and I kind of think it fits well with the theme of the game as well, because you don't really know what's just happened.
Yeah,
it's not like you hear a death sound and then you kind of respawn. It's this kind of like very soft, very ambiguous change. You know?
There was a point in the original mod where if you died, it would do the whole Half-Life major
Yeah.
fracture detected.
Yeah.
It always brought a really good tone to the game.
Yeah.
That's funny. Okay, let's see what happens. Is it the same? Whee! Come back. Is it gonna? Oh, that is very sweet. Oh, what does it say? It said, "Die from falling off a cliff once." I wonder how many times you can do it before it gives you another. Oh, it didn't spawn us in the same place though, did it? Uh-oh. I think. Oh, hold on. We spawned pretty quickly, or pretty close. I want to do that again. Whee!
Come back.
Come back. I love that. That's such a like soothing voice. Come back. All right. What do you think? A third time? I want to see if you get an achievement, because it gives you an achievement for one time. It says once. If you keep doing it, how many times?
Come back.
I mean... Alright, let's go. I mean, 3 times is fine. We won't keep jumping in there, right? Right? We shouldn't. There anything up here? No. Uh-huh.
One of the really important jobs of a composer, I think, is to provide the player or the listener with different emotional tones and states. And
Oh,
up until this point
that
in
wasn't
the game,
there the first
music has
time.
been very sparse, very intimate, and very isolating in a way.
That definitely wasn't
But
there the first time.
The island is also a beautiful and magnificent place, and what I wanted to do at this point for the first time in the game is to create something that was really epic.
Yikes.
So we go from that shift in scale where it's very intimate and small to suddenly realising that this is an extraordinary and magical place to be, as well as a difficult and quite sad and melancholic place to be. So the string players were instructed at this point to play with much more vibrato. Up until this point they've played in a very sort of Scottish style actually, no vibrato, very plain playing. But this was a really beautiful cue to write actually, because that has that scale. You suddenly realise that the island is really big, and you have this beautiful vista, and the music then shifts so the player can actually, just for a moment I think, enjoy being where they are.
Yeah, I think that's it. Can I? Yeah, I was going to say, this is actually one of my favourite parts of the game. It's just where everything, all the elements kind of come together perfectly. You've got the music, which is just epic, as Jesse said. You've got the landscape, which is kind of like this big open space. You've got all the little bits and pieces that I put into the detail of the environment, like the movement. There's leaves blowing around, there's the clouds in the sky, there's the mist rising off of the grass, and then you've got Dan's voiceover coming in there, and I think it's just like all of these elements coming together and just in perfect synergy, and just kind of, it really brings chills up your spine.
I know, this is the house that was in all of the the trailer art. Huh. It's that little piece of red right there. Looks like fishing tackle or something. Interesting. Yeah, the syringes and stuff and the medical scissors weren't in the barn the first time we played the game. So, like they were saying, different things spawn in different places. That way the interpretation of the game is different for each person. Because, people will be talking and they're like, oh yeah, and then the ultrasound, and the other player's like, what? I didn't have an ultrasound. Like, I haven't seen an ultrasound, but apparently some versions spawn in an ultrasound. Interesting. Like, oh, speaking of ultrasound, there it is. Yeah, right? Interesting. That's funny that we were just talking about the ultrasound and it's right there.
Inside the bothy, there is a randomised chance you can find an ultrasound picture on the table, and I think it's the one instance of randomisation in the game that is like the pinnacle of it, because the idea that Esther was pregnant when she died changes everything emotionally about how you understand the story. And not to say that you don't care as much if you don't find it, but it just adds
the first time we
other
didn't have
layer
the
of just
ultrasound.
the ground falls away from it the first time I saw it, and the meaning of the crash in Esther's death just means so much more when you go, it's not just about her, there was an unborn child here. And I think that's where the randomisation just hits its absolute peak, because it's one tiny detail that may or may not be there.
We didn't have this
but if it's
paper.
there, it's going to fundamentally change the way you
votes
feel about
either.
the entire thing. And that's the strength that the randomisation elements in Esther kind of provide, that you go, your likely kind of feeling about the story and your understanding about the story can be changed so absolutely by the occurrence or not of one tiny little prop detail. And that's something which, those moments I think are what make it really, really special. So it's for me, it's almost like the most important prop in the game, because when it happens, it's so profound.
Yeah, and it's
There was a
again,
mug
it's
here
just
the first
something
time we
that makes
played.
each playthrough more personal, I think. This is what I love reading about, people finding these things and going, holy shit, I've just found this one thing that's going to change it. That's changed my interpretation completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Yeah, we didn't get... There was a mug on this countertop before. It had the same designs as we found in the cave. Yeah, we didn't get the ultrasound the first time we played. We didn't get the syringes. Oh god, the bird. We got that bird. The jump scare bird. We didn't get the syringes and medical scissors the first time we played. Oh, here we go. We get another little commentary.
So as you leave the bothy and the seagull takes off, that's the one jump
No.
scare in the game.
Jump
Which is
scare.
kind of interesting because when we made
I
it,
told
we
you
kind
it
of
was a
had
jump
to, you know,
scare.
we kind of called it a ghost story, but there was no intention really. We kind of wanted this dreamy, hallucinatory type thing. But when it came out, people started coming back and saying, this game is absolutely terrifying. I was really, really frightened. And that was really amazing. And I think it's because nothing happens. We're so trained in games to go, there's stimulus all the time, that if nothing happens, you're waiting for something to happen. And kind of, I tend to go back to again and again the whole sequence in Dead Space 2 when you go back to the Ishimura, and it's like the best bit of Dead Space 2 because for what feels like hours, but it's probably only about 15 minutes, nothing happens and no necromorph comes at you, and it's absolutely terrifying because it's just this space and you're just left in it. So I think the kind of the bird here is really interesting because
That
it
was a
can
jump
actually
scare.
really, really make you jump.
It did.
But
The first
I
time
don't know
it
if that
did.
was part of why people were saying that the game was really scary, but it was a real surprise when people started coming back and saying, this is a frightening game. And I don't know how much of that is to do with the ideas in the game are frightening when you think about them, and how much of it is to do with just the emptiness and the lack of kind of things in the game make it a really quite stressful or quite frightening place. But it was a real surprise, I think, that sort of reaction from a lot of players when we shipped it.
Hi Shinobi, how's it going? This game is on your wish list, but you haven't bought it yet. So I'm going through. So I just played it, and now I'm going through and I'm playing it with the director's commentary. Sorry, I'm sick. That's why my voice sounds a little different. Yeah, we're having a sick day. The poor long cat. He was like, "Who is this human imposter?" Because my voice sounds all different now. But we're playing it with the director's commentary on, going through the second time because apparently, like, new things spawn in the game, and there were several paths that you could take. And so I'm going through and I'm taking the paths that I didn't take the first time. And also there's director's commentary, so every time you walk through one of these things, the director's commentary starts. But yeah, if you don't want to get spoiled, it's cool to lurk and stuff, but it's a very slow-paced game. It is the granddaddy of walking games, but since I'm sick, I thought this was the perfect game to play because it's very, it's my speed right now. Is that a dialogue? Yeah, so as soon as we walk through it, the director's commentary is gonna start.
So one of the things that influenced the visuals quite a lot was the tech limitations at the time, and also the kind of themes of the game. Like, tech-wise, we were never ever gonna kind of achieve photorealism, and I think that was a good thing. I mean, really, it made us sort of stretch out into other areas, and for me as an artist, it kind of made me think a little bit more creatively. I did a few tests at the beginning, and when I realized this wasn't possible, I kind of went back and I kind of did some research on different styles, and one of the ones that really struck me was this kind of impressionistic painterly style, where it's kind of like there's just enough shape and color there for you to form an image, but a lot of it is just your imagination. It's kind of like the believability of the environment is in your mind. So this is something that I really wanted to bring over into the game, and you'll see a lot of landscapes that kind of look very surreal, very kind of unreal, and that's mainly due to this impressionistic style.
But yeah, no, I really liked it. Like, see, I finished it and then I wanted to play it again. So, yeah, you wanted to play because you heard that it was the original walking simulator. Yeah, that's something they said in the very beginning was that they were like the first ones to do this kind of style, and now it's more popular. Like, there are a lot of other games that are similar to this, but they were the first ones to do something so strange and like unheard of. So yeah. But we don't hear the narrator in this walking commentary. So in the original game, there's a narrator that narrates once in a while as you're walking, and it's all very mysterious. It just feels like you're going on a nature walk.
Inspirations behind it. I'm on a strict you don't talk about stalker kind of thing going on here. But when Rob and I started talking, I think one of the first things that we kind of discovered was how much we're both obsessed with Stalker.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the major things behind it in terms of when people talk about game inspirations. I mean, there's a lot of FPS stuff in there, Doom, System Shock, but I think Stalker probably more than anything else. And Roadside Picnic, the Strugatsky novel that Stalker's based on, of the idea of this,
Roadside Picnic.
Incredible space
Yeah.
that you didn't understand, that's simultaneously beautiful and threatening.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think sort of
I've read that.
Tarkovsky's kind of films kind of play into that as well,
Oh,
particularly
yeah.
his version of Stalker, that you want to have this place that you feel rather than think about. And for me, that was like really kind of core to all of the inspirations for the game, was this is a space that is about feeling, not thinking.
Yeah, I think the movies in particular, I think I hadn't watched the movies. I'd read the book and I played the game, but when I watched the movie, it kind of all made sense to me, like why I like the game so much and why I like the story. It's just like every shot is like a painting. It's like every shot has its story to tell.
Right.
There's very little dialogue in the actual movie itself. It's just these long lingering shots, and each shot is amazingly beautiful, and in its kind of desolation. And for me, that was like a huge influence. You know, like trying to bring some of that through into the environments. So that is definitely something I'm going to struggle not to talk about. But the game as well. I'd say the actual Stalker game has a big place in my heart. Like gaming wise, it's one of the reasons I got into game art in the first place.
Yeah.
So that to me is a big part of it too.
Got like the skeleton of the ship right here. That's very like a striking image, and then with the cross almost, right? Like very almost like symbolic.
One of the more interesting and challenging things to do in the visual side of things is to kind of create an emotional connection with the player. With the music, it's very strong, and the dialogue can kind of help you to feel what the character's feeling, but to kind of really create an atmosphere and to create emotion, it's very difficult. So I designed a few things very subtly within the environment to kind of plant imagery into your mind and kind of make you feel certain things. With this shipwreck on the beach, you can kind of like, if you look at it from certain angles, you get this real like it's like a cross sticking up. It's this kind
I just said
of
that.
semi-religious imagery, but it really kind of it's not obvious. It's not in your face. It's just kind of like something that makes you feel like something you know, and so like there's a lot of deliberate attempts in the game to recreate that feeling, and it's kind of hard to point out in many other places, but it's done in a way where every single rock, every single plant, every single cliff face has been deliberately placed and designed in a way to try and make you feel something in the game.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they mentioned Roadside Picnic earlier too, because I was thinking, what did it kind of remind me of, like the feeling that I was getting while playing this game. Oh yeah, over here, the first time, I don't know if it's gonna spawn this time, but there were little paper boats at the end of this this cavern. Let's see what they have to say.
This is another of my favourite bits in the game, where you come along the edge of the sort of gully and you find hundreds of books, and it's one of the first times where most explicitly
I
there's
didn't
the
get
suggestion
spawned.
that nothing you're seeing is real, because
What?
there's just no way that this can exist, and it's a really amazing, uncanny moment.
Huh?
But it works, I think, for me, because you just go, I don't understand it, but it's lodged somewhere in my head, and I can't get rid of it, and I can't unsee this.
This wasn't here
I
the
think
first
for
time.
me, like in terms of my influences from books, I mean, there's the obvious sort of stuff like with Burroughs, Cut Up and things like that going on. But it comes to the kind of books that I really love, that like Roadside Picnic, or the other one by the Strugatskys as well, I absolutely love, is The Ugly Swans, that's just full of these images that you go, I don't understand, I literally have no idea what's going on here, but I can't shake it, it's just got its hooks in me. And I think more recently you've got books like Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation does this so well, where nothing is understandable, but you feel the logic, but you can't understand the logic, but you feel like the logic's there. And that, I think, is a really powerful thing that games are so good at doing, of creating these things. And I think where a lot of game writing for me becomes kind of the wheels fall off it, is that they have these amazing ideas and then suddenly there's this huge rush of going, right, we developed this mythos and we've shown you all the tips of the iceberg, which are really interesting, but now we're just going to show you the whole iceberg. And actually that's never that satisfactory as a player, because it robs the mystery. And I think the best game writing is those kind of moments where you go, I feel like there's something just outside the edge of my vision or just on the edge of my hearing, but it's the confidence to go, that's it, that's all you get, and the rest of it is up to your imagination. And I think it does loop back to games like Stalker. I think Skyrim at its best does it so well, where you just have these moments where you think, I want to know, but it's going to be down to my imagination to draw those things. And the player's imagination is the most powerful thing you've got in your design kit. There is nothing you can put on screen, there is nothing you can do with audio, there's nothing you can do with dialogue that will ever be as powerful as the player's own imagination. So if you oversell the idea and oversell the image, what you're actually doing is you're kind of not only robbing the player of the opportunity to invest in the game, but you're also fundamentally opting for a weaker tool than what the player can bring to the experience themselves.
Maybe there were those books in the first... What is this? Is it a bird? No! No! I don't know if that was there. Yeah, maybe there were those books, but... And I'm thinking of a different place where they had the little paper boats. Because I remember I went down one of those little caverns and I found a bunch of paper boats sitting at the end. That is cool that it spawns different things in the different games. Because, yeah, like, what is this? That's a rock.
One of the really important images in the game is the radio mast, and the soundscapes that I wrote for the game are really tied into this idea. So it's the concept of the tortured sounds that they're so broken down, they're so manipulated, and it really is supposed to represent the inner state of the protagonist at this point.
And candles.
It's that fractured understanding. So it kind of works on two levels, actually. We have the narrator who's trying to understand the journey that he's on, and we also have the audience's journey and their struggle for comprehension to understand what's going on in the game. So this distortion, this breaking down, this fragmented, kind of tortured sound really ties into the idea of the radio mast and that idea of communication, actually. That the game is trying to communicate something to you, the narrator's trying to tell you something, but it's so difficult to understand what that is.
I know, honestly, the reason I turned on the commentary and wanted to play it again, because I was like, I don't know what just happened. So I think that this might be the end of the second chapter. We're going to go into chapter 3 now. Whee! And then this is the cave chapter. So this should be interesting. It was really pretty in the caves. Look at that. It almost looks like an eye, doesn't it? Because it's the hole we fell through, but it looks like an eye. Like a hairy eye. And then, yeah, like back here, hold on, maybe they'll explain the candles. That'll be cool. Oh, I'm so interested to see what'll spawn in here that we didn't see before.
The caves in the game are really interesting because it's a very tonal shift within the whole visual look of the game. It's kind of like this more organic, more surreal, dreamlike landscape compared to what you're used to before this point. It's we kind of used the visuals and this kind of unreal theme very subtly, but here it's kind of at the forefront, and it's to me has kind of been designed as this kind of journey through the inner self, through the body, and it's
That bed is still
really
there.
designed to be a very different experience compared to the rest of the game.
See, I'm still wondering about that red. Because there's red on here, and then there's red in the water over here, and it just looks like maybe the rock is discolored. Oh wait, there's a little bit of red there too. Maybe it's just the rock discoloration. Yeah, just rock discoloration, see? But maybe it's supposed to be symbolic of, you know, blood, red. Because everything else is like blue, and this luminescent, the luminescent paint is everywhere, and we've got the little mushrooms. It's a very calm chapter.
This for me is probably the most pivotal music cue in the game, and it's the one that most people write to me about to say that they are absolutely obsessed with and they love. It's the only music cue that has singing, it has a female voice, and I think that's a really important shift for me. That you've gone from this beautiful string music, but it's quite abstract, into what is effectively a song. And with lyrics, so you're actually explicitly saying something as a composer at this point. The other thing that I think it's important to say for me is it's the biggest shift from the music that I wrote for the mod. It's the same music, but the act of having it sung by an amazing singer. I sang it on the original and it's really bad, and Clara Sanabras re-recorded it. And it's what good actors do, it's what Nigel Carrington did, it's what good musicians do, and they take something that you've created and they just shove it up into the next level and make something that's good into something really extraordinary. And also for me, I think it's a point where the environment art and the music just meld so beautifully and so seamlessly into one. I mean, on a personal level, I've played the game hundreds of times now.
Oh wow.
And I still enter the caves and I look at Rob's work and I'm just absolutely overawed, just gobsmacked by its beauty. And I just think it's a really magical moment in gaming for me, actually. I know that probably sounds really dramatic, but I just think it absolutely hits something where everything just works together. And the music is so dreamlike. You know, Rob has talked about the journey through the body, and I think that's absolutely, for me, the music becomes so organic and fluid and actually very feminine and female at that point. You're hearing the voice of his love.
I think this right here is my favorite part of the game visually, like all of these waterfalls coming down, and this, just the sound is so good, just like right here. That's my favorite part.
I just want to say that I think you can divide caves in games into pre and post Dear Esther. I think that it's just a way of breaking away from reality into saying what you can do with these spaces that actually makes them this incredibly, much more vividly colourful and much more kind of interpretative and look from it. And it's really interesting that I look at caves now in games and I find myself going, that's a very Rob Briscoe cave. I think that's an amazing thing to have achieved. So I think it's one of those, it's great paying other people's work compliments. I enjoy that because you never feel like you're being big-headed about yourself, but I think it is, I think particularly it does come again down to that blend between the audio and visuals that just, it's a real high watermark. I kind of, it's one of the areas in all of the games we've made that I'm most proud of.
I think as well, you think you know what you're getting with Dear
Yes.
Esther for the first 45 minutes of the game, wherever we are at this point, and then you step into something completely unexpected and completely new, and I think it just throws the player such a curveball in such a wonderful way.
I think it really did. I think this is just my favorite scene in the game with all those waterfalls. I think it's so pretty. I see a little commentary bubble up there. I wonder, hopefully we can get up there. I don't know if we missed it. I think that there's a way we can go down and then walk back up there. Let's try it. Alright, whee! Oh, I love like getting submerged. It's just so calm. Are we gonna come back up though? Eventually. Hello? Where's the way up? Here we go. So pretty. Oh. Oh, that would be so relaxing to be in a cave like this. However, I bet it's freezing. It looks cold. But I'd take it right now. My room's like 1,000 degrees. I'm not even exaggerating. Only slightly exaggerating. It is 100 degrees outside. Inside it's more, I think. Hence the fan. Look how pretty the water is. Oh, I love it.
I think when you're designing a game, it's very easy to get very locked into what the system can do. And you're trying to deal with all the different variations of things, that if a player does this, then this. And we have to deal with the consequence here. And our lead designer, Andrew, and I talk about this all the time, about you might have an idea, but then how does this radiate out throughout the entire system? And you get very caught in the idea of what the system has to be and how robust the system has to be and this kind of thing. And I think what's really important as a sort of a designer, as a creative, is that understanding that actually the real game is happening in the player's head, and that the system can be whatever you want it to be, but if the game isn't running in the player's head as opposed to on the screen, then you're missing a trick. You're not letting the game be everything it could be. And I think the great thing about working with a game as simple as Esther in a way is that those sort of consequences of player interaction, there's not a huge number of them in the way that there might be with a very mechanically complex game. So you can really heavily focus on what is the game experience that's being played out within the player's sort of mind and heart at the moment. And there are other, sort of, I know this is a kind of a way of approaching game design that has become increasingly popular over the last few years, and that Journey was a really, really good example of that game company really focusing on what's the emotional experience of playing this game. But I think, again, it's probably one of the reasons why Esther has lasted as long as it has done, because it's not a mechanical exercise, it's an exercise in trying to inspire you as a player to have the deepest experience and the deepest engagement, and to really run the game in your own head rather than being something that you're sitting 6 feet away from, kind of interacting with. I hate interaction as a term for that. I think it becomes very cold and mechanical and systems driven, and really interaction is completely trivial and pointless if there isn't an emotional engagement with the player and you haven't moved it away from the screen and into the player's head.
Yeah, this is so pretty. It reminds me of the Underdark in Baldur's Gate 3. This is kind of what the Underdark would look like if there was like beautiful waterfalls everywhere.
What's really important to me is that Dear Esther started out as a Half-Life 2 mod, and if the Half-Life 2 modding community hadn't championed it and celebrated it and downloaded it a lot and talked about it and loved it, then it would never have been a game. So it's never really bothered me, the kind of is it a game conversation, because as far as I can see it, Dear Esther and like everything that's come after it's been inspired by it, this was championed by Half-Life 2 modders, and they made it what it is. And so if you've made something that the real kind of hardcore of the hardcore, in terms of these are first-person shooter modders, have gone, this is really good and really special and we're behind this, then you've already got the support of a really amazing gaming community, and the fact that they championed it, we owe them a huge amount in terms of where we are. And I'm really proud to come out of that scene. I'm really proud to be a company and to be sitting here talking about a game that started life as a mod.
Yeah, I think they're the ones that really kind of like pushed us forward and given us the passion to be able to take it to a commercial level and give us the confidence to make us believe that there's an audience for this kind of thing.
That is very special. That like a group of people were so interested in.
Dear Esther was
creating
my
it.
first foray into writing music for games, and I actually approached it very traditionally, so more as a film score than a traditional interactive game music score. And what's really interesting for me is that the lack of interactivity in the music was never a problem for anybody that played the game. And that's a separate discussion, but there's a big schism between game music composers of how much the music should be following the player at all times in terms of interactive music. But one of the reasons I wanted to say something at this point was that this was my little first journey into thinking about how you write music for games rather than films. So I had this song that was a certain length, and Dan said, well, we don't know how long the player is going to take to traverse through that space. And I thought, oh no, he's right, and slightly panicked. So this was a very simple solution where the song was split in half, and then I wrote some drone music that could just play for as long as was needed as the player walked through the space, and then the second half of the song would seamlessly play. And it's very, very simple, but it's quite emblematic for me in terms of my career, because it was the first time that I had to think about the player. Because with film music it's so simple, you know exactly what's going to happen when, but this concept of interactivity was so new for me, so I kind of look back at it fondly because it's quite a basic approach to, compared to something like Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, where that was an
Floating.
open world adventure where I had to really think about the player and their movement through the space. So I kind of look on this very fondly, this moment in the game.
It's like a lazy river. It just takes us down. Hold on. I think up here I saw an urn before. The last time there was an urn over here. There it is. There's an urn. So we've seen 2 urns in the game so far. I'm glad that they addressed that there's no sprint button. I thought that was an urn as well, but no, it's a rock.
I don't know when the paper origami boats first came into things with Esther, really, but it felt like a really amazing metaphor of taking these letters and folding them into boats and then letting them leave the island, because you know at this point in the game, it's kind of the realisation is there that this isn't going to end well, and that the narrator is never leaving the island. And the idea that this kind of, again, the idea of communication, or the attempt or failing communication, or trying to speak through the coma, or whatever it is, however you want to interpret it. But the idea of putting the boat in the underground river really felt like it kind of reinforced that sort of dream-like kind of quality of the caves, of actually there's something really sad about this one boat, because when you see it go past, you know that even the boats aren't
Oh, sorry.
leave the island. Like this is something which doesn't have a tidy, neat kind of like resolution, and there's
They just get
even if you
stuck
don't
in
sort of think
underneath.
about it to that sort of level of depth, there's just something. It's one of those things that I really love about games that you can do, where it's just a moment that has
There
a
are the
really
boats.
distinct emotional tone to it, that you go, there's a pause when you see that boat goes past, that I just think is, it's something special you can do with kind of media like games.
I didn't see the boat go past, but we found this in the first time, and I think that's what I was thinking of when I was saying that, because he was saying the books, the place with the books, and I was thinking it was a place with the boats. So that's a paint can, right? Let's go on this side, I think. there another commentary button up here? Or commentary little bubble? Yeah, I like that they address that it's a walking game and not a sprinting game. That there's no sprint button. And that the music's supposed to like slow your heart rate down in order to like accept the pace of the game. Where's this commentary button? I thought I saw one over here. I thought there was one. Hello? Commentary button? No? I thought there was one. We might have hit it already. Hold on. Which way did we come from? Is my question. Uh-oh. Did I get lost? Oh, there's a commentary button up there. Okay, we're going the right way.
In a lot of ways, the caves were the hardest area of the game to actually write because we knew we didn't want to have much voiceover in there. I think because of the strength of the music, and this goes right back to the original mod, we wanted that to be the voice and for it to be a chance for Esther to speak rather than the narrator. And we also wanted to have this break so when the narrator came out from the caves, you had a real definite sense of something happening and that he had changed as a result of this journey. So it meant really felt wrong to have a lot of voiceover within there, but then that made it really difficult because then you had like 4 one-sentence lines in there and each one of those had to have an absolute clarity and to really kind of work. So I think for me it was really interesting. It's like the difference between writing kind of fiction and writing poetry. When you read really amazing poets and you have that incredible surgical precision where every single word is considered and placed so absolutely. And rather than being able to kind of, because the narrator rambles quite naturally, you could kind of get into the flow of the narrator's ramble in other places in the level, and this was a real challenge because suddenly I was having to write like a poet of going every single one of these words, every single cadence, every single sound has to be absolutely perfect or it'll just feel like the narrator's voice is intruding on the rest of the experience. So it was, yeah, I think definitely the most challenging area of the game as a writer.
Now we're going into the star-filled, beautiful crystal cave.
The sound here is a classic case of, again, what music I think does really well, which is you've had this soft, lyrical, beautiful, epic, dreamlike music, and then the moment you come out of the caves, you're into this really harsh soundscape, and the tonal shift is very brutal, I think, and deliberately so. You have very little music when you come out of the caves. You hear the wind, and it's a classic case of foreshadowing. So we know from this point that things are probably going to get bleaker, more difficult, and yeah, it's something that music does really well, I think, which is that emotional signalling and signposting.
If we just sink to the bottom. What does it say? Behold something. They really went to town.
This whole
with
area
the
moved,
paint.
didn't it? The original mod, this was a
Yeah.
cave right at the beginning of the caves where
Yeah.
everything was written, and it moved to the back end of the level, and we had this long corridor that's full of these kind of it's the point of high madness, I think, in the game, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of just where you feel like you're losing the plot completely, both like visually and auditory, and you know, it's kind of like this really frenetic moment for me.
I think it's where you feel most that you're underneath the mountain, and you feel
Yeah.
the weight of that mountain, and just I loved the idea when we were, putting through it of what would it actually take to do this? Like, to actually paint all these symbols and what is going on? And it really, it's quite an explicit kind of thing of madness of going, you would have to be insane or very, very disturbed to actually do this. And what is the process that this person's trying to work through, what they're trying to achieve by this? And I think it really strengthened it, making it a crawl through a tunnel as opposed to just a static location.
Yeah, I think it's the consistency and the coherence of the symbols is a lot more broken down as well. Like, you see some symbols before like scattered around the environments, but at this point they're like right in your face, and they're kind of just, it's just total madness, you know. Any kind of meanings have been crossed over and confused, and you know, I think it really helps to bring the tension up at this point at a level as well. So you're kind of coming out of this dreamlike state a little bit.
Yeah, you kind of know that you're getting towards the end of the serenity into something that's a bit more disturbed than that.
Yeah, I think it does that very well right here. I like that it was underwater.
This is a bit more of a contentious one because we disagree on this one. I struggle with this. With the points in the caves where you duck above and below the water, and you have to have that transition of audio. And I love the audio on both sides of the surface tension of the water, but I really struggle with you breaking water because it's such a hard edge to the sound. And I don't think there's any other way around that. And you need to have those moments where you do go underwater because it's so important. But it's one of the areas that's never sat very comfortably with me because I feel like in a level which hasn't got a single edge in it, it's the one edge within it and it breaks me.
And that's why I think it's so successful, because you've been lured into this completely hallucinatory, dreamlike world, and then all of a sudden, as a player, you're literally gasping for breath. You're coming up for air, and I think when we're talking about that metaphor of the body, for me, it's so about birth. And it's about this coming through the water, and actually it's a moment of realisation for me, but then you're having to go back under again and you're diving down. So for me, without wanting to sound incredibly pretentious, it's about the fight between the conscious and the subconscious and that struggle. Booyah!
There's actually a really interesting thing about that underwater section there, though, is that, I don't know if you remember, but you had a certain piece of music that plays when you're underwater, and it's, to me, I really like that. It's kind of like, because at this point it's kind of like a very calm, relaxed type of a journey, and you go underwater and it starts to break apart a little bit, and it's almost like, you know, that kind of psychosis is still there. It's not complete bliss at this point, and and it helps to build the atmosphere up to this final jump.
So we're both saying that Dan's wrong?
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. That's good. That's the way it should be.
I wonder if we can scoot around. I don't remember if we can or if we should just jump. Can we scoot? Oh, no, we jumped. Oh, yeah, I'm really... Okay, so this is where the car accident happens. Let's see.
The motorway scene. The biggest new addition to between the mod and the commercial version. This didn't exist in the mod at all. It was a completely new thing.
Yeah, it's well, I wasn't sure where the idea spawned to have this scene, whether I just sort of went off or we discussed it, or I can't remember. You know,
I can't remember. You remember? It just kind of appeared, didn't it? And then
yeah, it was just this kind of. I think for me, actually, I remember being some technical difficulty between the drop and then coming out at the end part, but it was like, it was the same thing that we dealt with in the past of like, how do we not kill the player? From a technical standpoint, I think it might have been something to do that, but it was also, you know, I can't remember where the whole thing came from.
I think it's my favourite point in the whole game, actually. I think it's just it's quite shocking, and it's so surreal, and it's so beautiful. And from an audio point of view, you have that baby's heartbeat bringing us back to the idea of the ultrasound was Esther pregnant? And again, it's one of those moments that I think everything just kind of collates together, and it's so unexpected.
Yeah, for me, it's like a moment of realization.
Yes.
It's like it's coming to terms with something almost.
Whether or not what actually is going on at the moment is real. This did happen. There's kind of an absolute. I remember playtesting it, and I didn't know that the car can get switched out with a hospital gurney. And I must have played it. I was like 3 or 4 times into playtesting it. The first time it switched out and it was a gurney instead. And I really remember kind of sitting there and going, "Oh God, that's just really being just stopped in my tracks by it." And it's one of those weird things you get when you're making a game that you know you'll never have those moments that a player does, where you know it all so well. It's really, really rare to be in a situation where you actually get a genuine, fresh player's eye view on what you're making.
Yeah, I was always a bit worried that it was maybe a bit too literal. Like we got a bit too literal with that. But I think looking back at it now, there's still a lot of strangeness going on there. Obviously, the whole scene is unusual, but there's still these like very subtle details that are there that kind of still making you think, what does that mean? Like I think if you look closely, there's like coins scattered around and things like that. It's
And for me, it's, again, sorry to keep going on about it, but it's about layers of subconscious for me. That you start overground, you go into the caves, you go deeper, you're falling down, it's going down the rabbit hole effectively, and then you go to the deepest level, and that's actually the truth, that's the reality, that's what happened.
I wonder, can we get over here? How do we get over to this side? I'm afraid to go too far because last time I went too far out, and it just spawned me out of the scene. Here we go. Good.
So the admission really is that I did play fast and loose with the geography of the M5. There isn't actually a welcome break service, it's just outside the junction of Sanford. But we also know, players. I mean, what a thing is it if you make something that's based vaguely on somewhere in real life. In terms of a compliment, when you're getting emails from players going, there isn't a welcome break there, and people really trying to work out where is this, and whole threads about where on the M5 it is. That's just the most amazing feeling. But I think what I really love what I think works really, really well in Esther, and again it's something that I think is really carried forward to our other games, is that a lot of the time we're not dealing with kind of like big, glamorous, amazing, epic places. It's a sort of like a ratty little island in the Hebrides. It's someone who lived in Wolverhampton. It's just outside, a service station on a stretch of the M5. And I think that earths what's going on. It gives it a realness as well, particularly when you sort of put it against the surrealness of the caves. Actually, you're kind of going, this is really surreal and this is really, really dreamlike, but actually I'm talking about, a car accident just outside a little chef, and that playing off those two things against each other.
It's like making the ordinary extraordinary.
Absolutely, yeah.
I wonder if we can go up here. Oh, yeah. If you walk too far away from the accident, it just spawns you out of the dream sequence.
This scene for me is like really, really iconic because it kind of brings this idea of the caves being an inward journey through the body together. It's really kind of like a symbol of rebirth, and it actually brings together a lot of the visual goals that I wanted to achieve with a lot of the symbolism in the game. Like I've talked a little bit about how the environment was kind of designed to provoke emotions, and kind of the impressionistic style gives you just enough information to make you think of things and feel things, But this is probably like the antithesis of this, and the whole feeling of rebirth here is quite strong. I know Jess.
Yeah, the music's really supporting that.
Yeah.
Because she sings always, always throughout, we've got always, always, and then she sings never, and a moment of absolute soaring. It's the climax of the music.
As you come out of the water and the music kind of swells, and you just kind of, it is like a moment of change has happened in some way, and
it's
think
rebirth, isn't it? For me, it's his moment of clarity and acceptance and understanding of the reality of what's happened.
And you're literally moving towards the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
You're actually doing that as you go through.
But the music, especially, I think before the music got layered in, that scene was nowhere near as kind of powerful for me. Like, that kind of just totally made it.
Alright, let's see. I think this is where the chapter ends, and then it's the final chapter. Yeah, there we go. And here we have the final chapter. They didn't address the candles, but maybe they'll address them now since there's so many of them in this chapter.
Dan and I had worked on lots of projects together, non-game projects, before we made Dear Esther. And I think the thing that links all of the projects that we've worked on together is that idea of hidden stories and layers of stories. And one of the things I wanted to do with the music was to embed hidden little hints and stories into it. So the music that you hear here has Morse code, and the Morse code is spelling out the word Esther.
No
and
way.
I really, really liked this concept of that some people would understand that it was Morse code and try and figure out what it was saying. It also provided a really interesting rhythmical dynamic. And yeah, it's just about these ideas of hidden stories and layers, but it also starts to emphasise the obsessional nature, I think, of the story in Dear Esther, and his agitation and actually slight panic. So you're getting this rhythm that just repeats and repeats and repeats obsessively. So I think even if you don't understand that it's saying Esther, and even if you don't understand that it's Morse code, you're still getting this feeling of this obsessional repetition and slight panic that he has. And again, it's kind of it's the new chapter, and it's spelling out that something has changed at this point.
It's probably the level which has changed most from the original mod. I think it's much, much bigger than the final level in the mod. One of the major changes in there is in the original mod, the whole side of the cliff face was covered in painting and writing, and a lot of that moved inside to that corridor in the caves where it's really obsessionally painted on. And it was really, we spent so long on that because we were trying to get it looking right, because it's one of those really interesting examples where I loved the image and the idea that you've got this guy painting the entire side of a mountain with words and symbols and things. But it was really interesting when it went into the rebuild, it just never worked. And I think it was because the environment was so crude in the mod that those symbols and that painting became the focus of the level, and it changed the feeling of the level completely, when actually that just wasn't something
If we go any farther, we die.
realise in any way, that not even technically, but just didn't artistically look and feel right. And I think probably sort of retrospectively looking back on it, that's about the sort of the sophistication and the subtlety that then came into the art, rather than just being, this is literally just a canvas that we write words on, to actually the environment telling its own story without the story being literally painted on it.
Yeah, it was very difficult when we were experimenting with that to kind of like make it not completely unreal. Like, I think for me it was kind of, I wanted to kind of bring the player a little bit back into reality after the caves, and I think with having those symbols everywhere, it was kind of pushing them out a little bit. So I think what we came to, the kind of compromise we had, it was kind of a nice in between.
Yeah, it didn't feel like a compromise to me. It felt like, it felt like it didn't work, but it kind of, but those symbols were coded. Like there's the hill in the background when you're standing right at the end of the boat and you look back, and you suddenly realise that the shape of the mountain is the shape of a woman lying on her side asleep. And that, I remember seeing it for the first time around and going, it's saying the same things, but it's saying it in a much, much, much subtler way than in the initial there, but it was definitely challenging going back to how do you have a deep, complicated, subtle art style but still manage to have something which is very sort of stark and symbolic laid over the top. It was much more challenging.
I think one of the most fascinating things for me about planning this director's commentary has been that in previous years, when all the three of us have talked about Dear Esther, we've talked about the interpretation of the player, but actually going through this together, post having made it, we're still surprising each other.
Yeah,
And I
actually.
think that's
They
really,
had-
really interesting for me, because it shows that we left interpretation for each other and that we trusted each other actually just to get on with it. And because we each brought our own special and unique contribution to the game, we didn't have to, in a way, talk it to death or say you have to justify every idea you have or talk it to death or explain it. That Rob's idea that the island is very tainted and corrupt, and my idea that Dan didn't know that the whole level of the caves is a birth metaphor. I think it's really amazing that we're still finding out things about the game that we didn't know.
I think it was nice when I came onto it, because Dan was basically like, he gave me a bunch of materials, but he left me to my own devices for a lot of it, and we kind of like, I finished a level and Dan would play it and give me some feedback, but he was very kind of like hands off at the beginning, which was really nice, kind of. So a lot of my interpretations just came through that downtime where I was just kind of like going off and doing my own thing, and so yeah, it's like interesting to hear Dan talk about it sometimes, because like there's some backstory that I've never even considered before, and obviously hearing Jess talk about it as well is really interesting, especially when it comes to the soundtrack. It makes me look at things in a very different way. So yeah, it's really interesting.
I think for me, like making games is so inherently collaborative. You have people coming together with different ideas and different takes on things, and in a way the least interesting thing you can do with that is to structure it all so heavily that there's no space for each individual person to bring what they're thinking to it. And I think the best games, well, for me, my favourite games are ones where you can really feel the personal footprint of each individual developer and aspects of it, and it feels like it has been a genuinely collaborative exercise where everybody has thrown ideas into the mix and everybody is bringing something to the table rather than people just following a kind of a really structured plan. So yeah, I think it probably is one of the reasons why Esther has had the sort of life it's had since release, is because there's 4 people if you include Nigel, all bringing very different things to it, and it gives it a huge amount of depth for something that's so simple on the surface.
Let's see if we keep walking, if we go boop. Come back. I love it when he says that.
Come back.
It's such a soothing thing. Come back. It brought us back a little bit farther than I was hoping, though. I wonder, hold on, can we go up here? Hold on, we have to walk all the way around. I want to go and see what is going on up there with the candles. Oh my god, how far back do we have to go? I wonder if it's like a little shrine or something up there. Is there a way to get up here? Jump! You can do it! I wonder if there's any commentary up here. Because this was the other path that we could take. It's interesting about the music, because I read that that flashing light in the cave that we saw, was also Morse code. What's gonna be up here? I was like, is that a knife? No, it's a paintbrush. We finally see a paintbrush. I think that's the first paintbrush we've seen. We've only seen the cans. Only seen the paint cans. Oh, and they've got a commentary bubble up there where we found the urn earlier. I mean, down there. Down up here, I'm not sure. Let's see. Oh, it's like a little memorial. This is different than the first time. We didn't see this.
I've been on holiday to Greece lots of times, and one of the things that I always really responded to emotionally was those shrines that you see on the road, and sometimes they're dedicated to saints, and sometimes they're to markate where an accident has taken place. So you'll get photos of the deceased person and flowers and candles, and it always really touched me. And so I said to Rob, I think it would be amazing to get these into the game somehow, and then Rob took that idea and ran with it, and I think they're so successful and they're so beautiful and they're really moving, and I think it's because you had this elemental scale, you have the island and it's huge and you have that
Is
scale.
Is that an ultrasound machine?
And all of a sudden you come around this corner,
oh my God.
and it's absolutely
I just
brought
noticed
back
the
to
medical
the human
scissors
scale
as well.
again, and to that relationship of
Oh.
the individual. And I think the other thing that it does really successfully is it's a kind of magic realism, because there's no way that you could have all those amounts of candles lighting your way. Who's lit them?
Yeah.
The island is empty. Who's put those shrines
Magic
there? But I
realism
just think
is a
it's a
good way of
really
describing it.
lovely bit of environmental storytelling, actually.
Yeah, so I guess it is open to interpretation. So I think is that an ultrasound machine, like an old ultrasound machine, and then they've got the medical scissors, like maybe they tried to rescue the baby while it was still in her womb after the car accident. They tried to rescue the baby and get it out of Esther. Ugh. Just saying that line makes me yikes. Oh goodness. Yeah, I didn't see that the first time I played. Yeah, I definitely didn't get the ultrasound version of the game the first time I played. Let's see what they have to say about this. Yeah, because I wasn't sure what
One of
this
the really
was.
nice things about the move from mod to the commercial version is that we had a couple of years worth of the community talking about the game before we went back into it again. And one of the things that I read on a forum was that someone had constructed this amazing version of the story where they'd decided that the narrator was Paul. And I hadn't thought of that. It was never part of the original writing. And I thought,
There's the urn.
that's so amazing that as a writer, your audience can find something in what you're doing that you hadn't thought of. So it was really important when we went back in to record the additional set of voiceovers. I thought, I absolutely want to do this. I want to take this idea that's come out of the fans and to run with this and to add an entire new sort of stream of story in there. So we added in a couple of cues within the force level that intimated much more strongly that actually Paul wasn't this other character who caused the accident, but actually you were responsible for everything. But again, it was then trying to find that balance of not overcooking it, so you weren't led to that idea, but just if you happen to have the combination of just a couple of narrative units, then you would possibly come to that interpretation. But it was really amazing to be able to say, it felt like giving something back to the fans that had enabled us to make the remake in the first place, and it's always a lovely moment as a developer to be able to recognise your fan community and kind of say, thanks, this one's yours, this one's here for you.
There's a person on the hill. That person wasn't there the first time we played. Maybe they were, but there's a person. You think that's a ghost? That's what I think, that there was I think I read that there were like some ghosts that you can see in the game, or like some shadow figures. That's one of the shadow figures right up there. And it like changes a little bit too. Huh. So it's like, maybe that's the ghost that's like kind of lighting the candles, you know? I wonder if they'll fade or if they just kind of hang out there. I feel like they're fading. that we saw that. That's cool. It's very interesting that there are all those little details that weren't in the first playthrough that I noticed. I didn't see there was a person on the hill. Cause look, he's gone. The person's gone. They're not on the hill anymore. See? Oh. Okay. I bet we missed a bunch of other ghosts because I read that there are little ghosties around, or like the shadow figures or whatnot. Yeah, I think that this is a really good game to play when you're sick. Especially with the commentary that way. Yeah, I can save my voice a little bit.
What's fascinating to me, Dan, is that you're an atheist, but each of the 3 games that we've made are so strongly about religion, either the language or taking allegories and stories. Why are you so drawn to it?
I think I'm really interested in people and the stories that make up people, and I think there is like in the Bible, like most kind of religious texts, it's not about what it is, it's about what is behind what it is, and that's what you're really getting to, is the idea of the sort of the parable or the metaphor. And it really felt like, particularly with Paul on the road to Damascus, is a story that many people know and we can understand, and it's about redemption and consequence and guilt and transformation and who you really are and what that means. And it felt like just a really strong,
And
powerful
the guy's name is
way
Paul,
of
right?
making it very
One of the
accessible for
interpretations.
narrators, kind of in a turmoil, in a kind of a story that we know really well. And there's a universality to those kind of questions that, whether it's, Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's kind of Buddhism, that they're asking very broadly similar questions. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a good person? How should we behave to each other? How should we feel about the world we're in? And it's a really powerful way of speaking to a lot of people. I think that's always been really important as well, is that it's about saying, no matter who you are or what your kind of like outlook on life is, whether that's faith-based or secular, that we are all effectively asking the same questions, and that's why I think all our games kind of tend to be around those questions.
Yeah, because one of their games was called The Rapture, right? Or something. And here's the little boats.
Is Dear Esther a depressing game or a hopeful game?
For me, it's kind of like a mix of both, really. I think, like, my interpretation is kind of like, I always feel like kind of depressed when I think about the kind of turmoil that this guy's been going through for God knows how long, and the kind of environment he's been in, and all these events surrounding his story. But for me, I always feel like a little bit hopeful at the end. The conclusion just feels like a relief, and like this is kind of all ended in some way. What do you think, Jess?
I think it's a game about acceptance, and I really like that. And I think it's telling that a lot of people with mental health issues have responded really positively to the game, and we get a lot of emails and letters from those people saying that it's helped them through a really difficult time. And for me, that's because it's about the struggle of being human, that it's hard and that we love and that we grieve and we lose, but we come through it, and those things are what makes us human, that it's transformative and that the pain is part of life. And that's a really beautiful message, and I think that's what you do so well, Dan. That's what you write about. You write about what it is to be human. So Dan, you wrote it.
Without wanting to cop out, one of the things about writing it that I really wanted to do was to make something that people could take and could own, and it would be their take on it, and their interpretation of it mattered in a way that mine didn't. My job was to give them the architecture to interpret in their way. So
I think that is a cop-out. I do. I think as a writer you always have.
Yeah, I think it's redemptive, but I don't think the redemption is as cut and dried as it's all okay at the end. It's not okay at the end, but there is a release, there's an escape.
Yeah, that's not. There's
bad
not.
times
It's not
will
okay at the
happen,
end.
but they will end, and they won't always end positively, but they will end.
Won't
And
end
that's
positively.
I think the redemption of it, of saying that
This
things are never
too shall
easy.
pass.
This too shall pass.
Which my mum
yeah.
always says, you know, and I think that's probably the motto of the Chinese room,
Yeah,
actually,
absolutely.
isn't it?
Like, I don't think it's as kind of openly positive as, say, Rapture had a much more strongly positive end. I don't think Esther has. I think it's much greyer than that. But I think fundamentally it's about coming to terms.
Hmm. I know, because I wouldn't say it has a positive end.
So, Dear Esther is the first walking simulator.
Hmm.
How do you feel about walking simulator?
You know what? I think I took offence to it when it first became a thing.
That's funny.
But you know, I think I don't mind it so much now. I think the fact that we have kind of taken ownership over it, like that genre has been kind of made our own by not just our game, but like a bunch of different games that kind of embraced it. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I'm still really confused about the need to categorise in games, probably more than any other creative industry, and I think it shows that games have a long way to come in terms of how we describe an experience. So I do agree with Rob that it's really positive that we reclaimed Walking Simulator, but I still find it reductive, possibly, as a term. What about you, Dan?
I think for me, it's people want to know what they're buying and what they're getting into, and I think it's so people understand what a walking simulator is now. In a way that if it was like first-person adventure or slow-moving, not very interactive story-driven games, they're all sort of really very fluffy. But
Fluffy.
I think if you buy a game and someone says it's a walking simulator now, you've got a pretty good idea what you're getting. And there's Gone Home, Firewatch, Stanley Parable. There's so many other really good titles.
Those are ones that I was going to play
in that
next.
group of games out there now, but it does have an identity, and I think that's the really good thing about it. I mean, when Esther came out, there was literally nothing. We had no idea how we described it or what we called it.
We actually struggled with that quite a lot.
Yeah, and sort of ended up being sort of like a ghost story, because it felt like it was the closest thing we could get. But it feels like now you can make a game like this and you can say it's a walking simulator, and people will know what it is straight away.
Yeah, I think that's the nice thing is there's a whole group of games out there now that quite comfortably put
It's
themselves
funny
into
they
that
mentioned
category.
those other two
So
games.
it's
Those are ones
like if
I
we were
wanted
to
to
come
play
out before and just
next,
said
actually, like
it's a
right
walking
after this.
simulator, people would have been like, well, that sounds terribly boring. That doesn't. Why the hell would I play that? But now people
I
kind of
liked it.
are a little bit.
Them out.
Yeah, now people are kind of familiar with what that means. The people out there who actually seek this sort of stuff out, and it's kind of really cool. I mean, me myself, I would actually do that, use that as a term to search. But yeah, I mean, it's a very simplified term for what our game is, and there's obviously a lot more to it than walking. But I think when you look at other genres, they're also kind of very simplified. You know, first-person shooter, role-playing game. It's to me it doesn't seem as bad as any of those other things.
It's funny they mentioned Gone Home and was it Firewatch? I wanted to play those two next. Firewatch. I wanted to play those two next, like right after this. I was gonna play it, so it's funny they mentioned those two games.
There's a bit of an illusion of simplicity with games like Dear Esther that people kind of assume because there's not a lot of mechanics and there's not much going on in that sense that they're easy to make. And I think actually it's kind of the opposite in a way, that because they're so simple, everything is exposed and everything has to be exceptionally good for it to work, because you're carrying a player's experience on a fairly sparse, minimal kind of framework, and that really means that every aspect of it has to be produced at a really high quality and has to be done with a lot of passion and a lot of thought. There's nowhere to hide in a game like Esther, and that's something which I think carries through to the best games of this type. You can see with all of them there's a real commitment to kind of depth and a really intelligent way of approaching design, and a real kind of trust in the player and a real assumption that players are smart, imaginative people who want experiences. It's not a game that it's easy to just knock off or to do with any kind of lazy attitude. You have to be really, really passionate and care a great deal and put an awful lot of thought into it if it's going to work.
One of the things that I think was added more frequently in the the final version of Dear Esther was the inclusion of a number of ghosts in the game.
Oh, yeah, we
These
talked
are not
about them.
like ghosts that you'd see in a normal horror game. They're just very loose silhouettes.
Yeah,
that you'll
we saw one
see
on the hill.
around the island. Usually like quite a distance off, or just kind of somewhere that you barely see it out the corner of your eye. I think this is a good example of where it's kind of really in your face, and these are kind of just something that we put in to kind of not just bring some unreal elements to the island, but something supernatural as well, something that's kind of beyond this world, something kind of unsettling. And yeah, we've a lot of effort's been put in to make these things very subtle. Didn't really want them to be like, I didn't want it to be a ghost story, so to speak, but I just kind of wanted to bring some of this supernatural element into the game, and this area is probably one of the most prominent, because you can see it just before you go down into the gully here, and I think it's really one of my favourite scenes, just because of it being so spooky, so unreal, and so interesting.
I'm glad we walked back and went up here, because there was a commentary bubble here too.
The
Can we
overlook,
jump?
the point about this to me is that it's probably the voiceover in the game that kind of sums up the whole story and the experience. It's almost like a recap of everything that's gone before you start the final climb. And you know it's that pause before you're going to start the final climb and before the game's kind of builds to a climax. But you can also see the whole level, and it's like the idea that you are standing looking down on your own journey, a bit like the idea of your life flashing before your eyes, or sort of like seeing your body but having an out-of-body experience at the moment of death. And it was really designed to try and get that feeling as the player, that you stop and you take stock of everything, and there's a bit of a sense of there's no going back. You take a breath and now it finishes. And I really wanted to kind of achieve that sort of sense, and I think we did. I think it really came together here, that you got that sense of going, right, now this ends, and now I move forwards to it.
I wonder what happens. Let's see. Whee! Will it say come back? I wonder where it respawns us. Come back. Okay, at least it respawned us right where we were. Alright. Let's continue on up. I still can't quite read, and as he was proceeding on his journey, I think that's what it says. Come back. I like that.
So here it kind of
The lighting
environment becomes a
changes.
little bit more surreal again.
It's like
we
more
kind of
purple, pink.
play with the colors a little bit, bring up the saturation. It's kind of a little bit of a return to some of the more cave-like aesthetics in terms of colors and stuff like that. And it's kind of there to kind of signpost another significant moment in the game, or something that's leading up to the significant moment. It goes back to this kind of idea of having these emotional signposts in the visuals of the game, without it being overly obvious. And some of that emotional stuff comes just through the colours of the environment, and the more saturated they are, the more kind of surreal things become. So this is kind of like a turning point in the game. It's kind of like the final notice of you reaching the end.
The music that's playing here is a repeat of another cue, and originally we hear it played on the piano, and the string quartet take on the piece here. And it's one of those really nice instances where we were in the studio and I had this idea of how it was going to sound, and I thought it was going to be quite full and rich and, yeah, full-bodied. And then one of the string players said to me, this is wrong actually for what we're playing. And they said, let's strip out all the vibrato, let's play it in a really Scottish, plain style. And it absolutely transformed that piece, and it's one of the really special things about being a composer, is that you get to collaborate with people who come fresh to it. So you have this preconceived idea of how it should be, and then they say, no, why don't we turn it around and think about it like this? And it absolutely fits and works for that scene, because what we're getting at this point is a sense of fragility, of an ending, and it's almost reminiscent of a funeral procession. It's slow and it's dirge-like. But yeah, it was just a lovely moment where they gave something of themselves, and that's what's amazing about working with
rings.
live instrumentalists.
Look.
You're never going to get that from a sound.
We found rings. I didn't see that in the first time. There's rings, Esther's, and then, right? Interesting. Yeah, we definitely didn't see these rings the first time. I don't know if I didn't notice them or if they just didn't spawn in. Pretty. There's the markings on the hill. Let's see, let's make sure we're not missing anything. I don't think so. The next commentary bubble is up there. That was cool to see the rings. We didn't see the rings for the first time. I'm glad that Kitty came out. I was missing him.
It was possible that this last section of the game could have felt quite laborious and forced because it's two long zigzagging paths that just go up, and there was a real importance to getting it right. Quite a lot of work went into it. I think at this point for me, you probably as a player understand that the narrator's going to die at the end and that this is it. And that unlike where the rest of the island, there's this sense of this could just keep going on forever and ever and ever, and you're going to keep the motif of come back. But I think when you set on this path, we really wanted to have that sense of this is it, this is the last time you're going to walk these paths, this will end now. And that sort of idea of going, you're kind of climbing towards your death, but you're also moving towards a point where that glimpse in the caves where you see the motorway and you go, I understand what this is about. For me, the whole path up the side of the mountain is about saying, it's okay. It's that kind of starting to kind of release it and go, it's kind of okay that Esther died. It's kind of okay that the accident happened. I know that I'm going to die. I know that this is going to end. And I know that there's nowhere for me to go apart from follow this path, but that's all right. And it was very sort of hard to kind of try and find that subtle mix between the dread of it and the acceptance. It's where the positive and the negative and the kind of the loss and the redemption really start colliding for me. At least certainly that was what we were trying to achieve with it.
These steps are so... I love the wind. You can feel it almost.
With the climb being quite a poignant moment of the game overall and of the story, it was quite a difficult task to try and make that climb still interesting and not too laborious, because it's kind of this zigzag up there with nothing really. There's no real environment. You just kind of have the sea on one side and the cliff face on the other. So there was quite a lot of work that went into kind of building up this feeling of tension as you're rising and kind of making this
with the wind
moment as poignant as possible while still making it interesting. So a lot of effort was put into building up this weather, building up the winds and the swaying of the grass and kind of the volume of the soundscapes and everything mixing together with the music, and just kind of visually really trying to make this a tense moment. And I think it's hopefully been pulled off all right. And you'll notice when you get to the top, this kind of tension dies, and that's very purposeful. You'll see no more wind. It's just kind of like a symbolic thing where you're coming to the last moment, the point of no return, and that's been very deliberately designed that way.
They didn't really talk about what's written on the mountain itself. The sound design is very good. Oh. Let's see if we can see the moment, hear the moment when everything dies down. Is there a commentary button? A commentary button? Oh, there we
We
go.
had a lot of debates, didn't we, about the ending of the game and whether the player should retain control or whether it was okay to go to a cutscene at this point.
Yeah, this is a
I
cutscene.
personally don't mind it. I actually actively like it because I think it works really well as a metaphor for loss of control at that point. Dan, I know you're not as keen.
Yeah, I'm not. I would have loved the player not to have had control taken away from them, but to me it was a kind of
Yeah.
it was a balance between two evils: the evil of having a cutscene and the evil of the player accidentally falling off the ladder halfway up and destroying the ending.
Yeah, I agree. Like
That's
we
funny.
tried, I think we tried a few different things, and the tech at the time just wasn't. The ladder tech at the time just wasn't there. So, and the other thing for me
Ladder
was
tech.
pacing. It was
Uh-huh.
making sure all the music, the voiceovers, the timings, and everything were perfect for that final
Mhm.
jump-off point.
I can see why they
And
did it.
just letting the players kind of noodle around going up the
Noodle
ladder for what may
around.
have been like 7 minutes because it's a tall tower.
Noodle around.
Was
I would have noodled
kind of an
around.
impossible task.
I would have definitely noodled around. Oh.
One of the things
do
that
see the
I enjoyed
gravity
the
of the-
most on working on Dear Esther was Rob's beautiful visuals were so inspiring, but Dan's words are always so amazing to write to. I think that's where we start as a partnership. And the music at the end was so easy to write because that last voiceover, it's the pinnacle of the writing to me, as it should be, because it's the last VO, so you would have failed if it wasn't good, but it is just so beautiful and moving. And for me, talking about whether it's a hopeful ending, the music is really hopeful at this point, and it signifies to me transformation, freedom, escape, acceptance. Yeah, and it was just a beautiful cue to write, actually.
I don't know, I can't remember quite where it came from in the mod, but the moment when we went, or we could put the bird in there, you could see the bird's shadow,
Oh,
and
I
actually
loved
it
that
turned
part.
from being kind of like a straightforward literal suicide into a metaphorical, or to my mind, kind of like
He
I
became a
always really
bird.
believed the narrator did turn into a bird just before they hit the ground.
Yeah.
And that was really important. I think it's
That's
probably
kind of what
the
I thought.
strongest ending in any of our games so far. But yeah, I'm very proud of the way everything came together in that last section.
Because
Yeah, I
you
think
see
it's
the
bird thing was
reflection of
really
the
interesting,
bird.
'cause I think it was in the original mod.
Yeah, you see the
but
shadow of the bird.
The timings and everything were just all
Yeah.
off, and you never really saw the seagull. Yeah, at least the shadow is.
Yeah, you
as
see
well.
the
It was
shadow
all
and the
kind of like
reflection. Yeah.
a little bit broken, and I remember when we went
Uh-huh.
back in,
That's
I made
what
a
I
real
kind of
effort to
felt,
try
that it
and
was
get
okay
that
that
shadow
it became a bird.
just out of the center of the view, so you kind of
Mm.
have this hint of something happening, and I think you can hear the sound of a seagull flapping its
Yeah.
wings. It's like
Oh.
very subtle, but like I say, I kind of really like the way that came together. It kind of, it's very, like I say, it's kind of like a release, but at the same time, there's still this kind of ambiguity there. It's kind of beautiful.
And I'm really proud that I got the monitor in at the end for an ending of, it goes into the hospital monitor, signifying the flat line, and I think it's it's one of those moments where you never want to be so clever that people notice it and it takes them out of the moment, but it just flows in through the music, and it just feels like everything comes together at that last point. That last VO, Rob's amazing visuals and the music. Yeah, it feels like a really, really strong and beautiful ending.
And then in the last second, Nigel Carrington's delivery of just those two words have come back, where he just pitch perfect.
Yeah.
So that's the end of the director's commentary. We'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone for listening. We hope you've uncovered some secrets and some facts that you didn't know about the game before.
We'd also like to say a huge thank you for buying the game, and for all our fans who've been behind us and been behind the game and have kept it alive all these years. It's a real privilege that it's still out there, still such a title people love so much.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to the future and what we can
Get
create.
us out of the moment.
Coming up next.
Activated a
Thanks for
spoil.
listening.
Cheers.
Bye.
Oh my god. Well, I'm really I'm glad that we played this as the original walking simulator. This set the bar so high. It's really good. It's different than anything I've ever played. I really liked it. I mean, I liked it so much that as soon as I finished playing it, I went back and I played it with the director's commentary, so that speaks for itself. Longcat has a bird toy. I call him Figaro because he sings, and he just activated it like right as the final moment of them talking. So, but yeah, no, this has been good. I liked it. It was a good game to play while I'm sick, because it helped me save my voice a tiny bit, even though I chattered a little bit. I thought it was funny that they explained why they chose to make the final scene a cut scene instead of having the player have control, because they would have been noodling around on that ladder for like 7 minutes, and I'm like, I definitely would have been noodling around. Such a good description. I would have been noodling around on the ladder, and yeah, like they said, you would have fallen off before you reached the top, and it would just ruined the ending. But yeah, I liked the interpretation that you become a bird at the end, because you see the bird's shadow as he flies, and it's beautiful. Yeah, and I liked that we saw the little ghosts the second time around, the shadow figures, and also the first time we played, we didn't get any of the ultrasound things, because the game spawns in new things each time you play, so we didn't get any of the ultrasound things. And at the end there was that altar with the I think it was with the ultrasound machine, like it was an ancient ultrasound machine, and you saw the like medical scissors. So there was that like interpretation that maybe they tried to rescue the baby after the car accident where Esther didn't make it. But yeah, no, this has been really beautiful, and I love that it was set off of the coast of Scotland on an abandoned island, and it's just really mysterious and beautiful. Yeah, I liked this game a lot. Yeah, so thank you for joining me. This has been great, and it's been a good distraction from being sick. We might come back actually in a little bit, but I haven't eaten today because I didn't have much of an appetite because I wasn't feeling well. I'm feeling a little better. My voice doesn't sound that great, but like this morning I woke up and it was just I was feeling atrocious. So this has been a good distraction. But yeah, we'll come back maybe in a little bit. They mentioned the game Gone Home, and that's actually what I was thinking about playing next. But we'll see. Maybe we'll figure it out. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me. This has been great. And we'll see each other soon.